Welcome to Trial Talk, insights from experienced New York trial attorney Michael Joseph.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Trial Talk, insights from experienced New York trial attorney Michael Joseph. With more than 2 decades of experience in New York courts, Michael has built his practice representing individuals whose rights have been violated and who are facing serious legal consequences. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today, Michael and I are talking about false arrest and when someone may have the right to bring a lawsuit after being taken into custody. Michael, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
You bet. Can you sue for false arrest? What qualifies? What legally qualifies as a false arrest under New York law?
In New York, under both federal law and state law, let's talk about what a false arrest is and who you can sue. Okay? So a false arrest, the technical definition, is an arrest without probable cause. So just a lot of people think just because they didn't do something means it's a false arrest. Not necessarily, because what we have to look at is whether the officers had what's called probable cause, or in other contexts where it gets into qualified immunity, a reasonable belief that someone did something wrong or that the law was broken. So technically, a false arrest by definition is an arrest that occurs without probable cause to believe that someone has committed a crime. So what we see a lot is cases against police officers for making arrests, and where it's just a police officer, making an arrest of someone on the street. That's fairly easy, because then it becomes, well, was there probable cause for this officer to believe this person committed a crime? If there wasn't, there's a false arrest case. Now, what is probable cause? Probable cause is a reasonable suspicion or a belief, a real grounded, objectively verifiable belief that someone did something wrong or someone broke the law. And if that's not there, there's no basis for an arrest. We see this a lot, especially in New York City, where cops just jump out and shake people down or try to arrest them because they look out of place, or maybe they're in a certain neighborhood or standing on a certain street. That's not enough. There are inklings as to whether someone's a criminal or not a criminal, or they're just random suspicions aren't enough. It has to be objective. Now, in other situations, when we talk about who can you sue, it gets a little more complicated, where an arrest is based on what someone else said. Okay. So if you have situations where people come to us and say, such and such person lied to the police, well, in those circumstances, if the police are relying on what somebody else said, they generally can't be sued for false arrest, unless they knew or had real reasons to doubt that person's credibility. However, the person who made the accusation can often be sued. So in these cases, for example, we see a lot where a store manager or a store employee will call the police and say someone's shoplifting. But then when they actually look at the video, the police sometimes actually do that. They look at the video to see if there's evidence that they stole something, especially if when they come to the store, they don't find anything on a person. In that situation, even though the police may have been involved in the detention, they can't really be sued for false arrest, but you can sue the store owner. So where a business or a business employee makes a claim of false arrest, anybody in New York, under New York law, anybody who's made a false accusation, knowingly and willfully made a false accusation to the police, can be sued for a false arrest. It's a little different under federal law, which only applies to, we'll call them state actors, or people employed under what they call under the color of law, is the magic definition.
Got it. So in that scenario you're talking about, I'm in a store, an employee observes me, suspects me of shoplifting, and then the police come, they detain me. It turns out I'm not shoplifting, right? And and now I can turn around and I can sue the store versus not the employee necessarily. I'm going to sue the deepest pockets, so to speak.
Well, you can sue the store, and if you know who the employee is, they could be sued also, because obviously under New York law, a store is vicariously liable for whatever bad acts an employee does within the scope of their employment. So you can sue the employee who did the wrong thing. You can sue the employer, and in other cases, if the police, for example, show up and it's objectively reasonable to say, hey, this person didn't commit a crime, or if it's evident they didn't commit a crime, the police look at it, for example, the police look at a surveillance video from the store, and it's evidently clear that no one stole anything. if they then proceed with an arrest, they can then be sued because they've proceeded with an arrest where they know the underlying information is false. But in general, where they don't go that far, if someone just calls and says, "Yeah, I saw this person stealing," they're generally privileged to go forward with the arrest. But the store can be sued for making the false accusation.
Mm-hmm. And then that's a whole nother can of worms because they had some reason to believe I was shoplifting or
They may, or even not. So people are crazy. People sometimes make things up. So, maybe
news flash.
People are nuts.
People lie.
People lie. People misinterpret things. People don't want people who are wearing certain clothes in their stores. There are all kinds of silly reasons we've heard over the years.
See also profiling. What if someone is arrested, right, and then the charges are later dismissed, does that automatically mean they have a case for false arrest?
Well, it doesn't automatically mean they have a case for false arrest. It's certainly required. For example, you can't sue if you've actually been convicted of something for false arrest, because that means if you were convicted, that establishes prima facie proof that there's probable cause. On the other hand, if the charges are dismissed, that's a good first step. Okay, in a false arrest claim, it's a necessary step. However, you also have to be able to show that not only were the charges dismissed, but that you didn't, and that you were in fact innocent. But you also have to be able to show that the arrest was made without probable cause. In other words, there wasn't even a reason to believe that you should have been arrested. And now that we're talking about charges, this gets a little more technical, because when someone is arrested, a false arrest only covers a period of time up until a person is arraigned, where a criminal proceeding goes, for example, beyond the arrest. You don't just sue for false arrest. Then you get into either malicious prosecution, because once you're under the law, once a arraignment has occurred, you're now being held by the judge, or you're now being in custody or subject to the court's jurisdiction. So you have to be able to show malicious prosecution, because you have to be able to show that somebody provided false information to the court to allow the proceedings to occur, or that the police or someone else intentionally withheld exculpatory evidence, or that your rights were some other way violated, like there was fabrication of evidence, or there's a number of different things. But basically, to recover any money for time, for example, we see people who are really harmed by the system, who are held in jail, who are held at Rikers Island for weeks or months or even years waiting for a trial. A simple false arrest claim doesn't cover that whole period. It only covers up until they saw the judge. So that's a whole nother set of elements which you have to get into to be able to establish or seek recovery for the period of time that after the initial arrest itself. So I think if you're arrested or falsely arrested and prosecuted, you really need somebody who's done this before and who's familiar with all these different causes of action. Because if you get someone who's a couple of years out of school, just sues for false arrest, you may wake up at the end of the case and find, wait a minute, you can only recover the first 24 or 48 hours if you only sued for false arrest. You have to be able to also establish elements of malicious prosecution. So to establish a case for malicious prosecution, you have to be able to show that the prosecution itself, not just that there was no probable cause for arrest, but the prosecution itself was initiated without probable cause or continued without probable cause to believe that it could succeed, which is different than the probable cause standard for an arrest, that it was done without malice, I should say. So it's an initiation and continuation of a proceeding with malice, which ends successfully in the accused's favor, are generally the elements for malicious prosecution.
Got it. Are there situations, I know you've been doing this a long time, are there situations that tend to lead to false arrest claims in real cases?
Typically what we will see is where, for example, the police have had an encounter with somebody and they themselves have gotten out of hand. They put their hands on somebody, they've assaulted somebody. Now they have a problem if the person is in charge with something. So we do commonly see the usual charges we see in that sort of a situation where it's a street encounter, someone's just walking, minding their business. The police try to search them or ask them for ID and they just want to keep walking, be left alone. You'll see charges of obstruction of governmental administration, resisting arrest, and even assaulting the police officer, which are usually created just to justify the arrest. Now, that's problematic for the officers because obstruction of governmental administration doesn't just mean, unlike what most police officers think, it doesn't mean you just didn't do what the police told you to do. It means that you actively took a role in interfering with a lawful government process or procedure. Same thing with assault. I mean, you have to actually attempt to assault the injury, not just them hurting themselves while falsely arresting you, or letting up their fist while they're punching you, or that we've seen that. That's why I laugh. And for resisting arrest, same thing for resisting arrest. There has to actually be an underlying lawful arrest for a police officer to arrest someone for false arrest or for resisting arrest. In other words, without a lawful underlying arrest, you can't really be successfully charged with resisting arrest. So one of the scenarios we really see a lot of false arrests for stuff like obstruction of governmental administration, disorderly conduct, that's another one, and resisting arrest. We see those a lot of times where someone's been subjected to force without justification, and it's really an attempt by the police officers to create a justification, keep themselves out of trouble.
Yeah, that sounds familiar to me. What about evidence? What types of evidence are most important in proving that an arrest was not legally justified?
Well, thanks to new laws, we now have some of the best evidence in the world in a lot of our cases. We have the police body cam footage, which we get. And, the police officers can say what they want to say, but the cameras themselves don't lie. So a number of cases we've won both when we were doing criminal defense and even as a plaintiff suing for false arrest or malicious prosecution or other civil rights violations or excessive force, is where the camera shows one thing and a police officer says something completely different. Juries aren't stupid; they believe the camera.
Yeah, and also there goes the police officer's credibility.
Yeah, well, usually those cases settle because they know we have the goods on them.
Yeah. Have you seen cases where mistakes in identification or incomplete investigations led to someone being wrongfully arrested?
Well, certainly there's what we've seen a lot of times in terms of a person who's been falsely arrested is just plain sloppiness in the police department. For example, they've had a number of cases where what's called an I card, which is like someone's wanted for questioning, they don't get purged out of the system when someone actually goes to court and is no longer wanted for questioning or no longer a suspect in a crime. It stays there. So we've had a number of cases where people are arrested on I cards that are on cases that have already been dismissed, and there was really no basis for them to even be stopped or arrested.
It's almost like administrative error.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit.
Yeah. Let's talk about damages. I mean, what damages can someone pursue in a false arrest lawsuit?
Well, in a false arrest lawsuit, generally, if there's you're entitled to compensation for the amount of time you spent while you were actually under arrest, any emotional damage it caused, for example, if there's shock, post-traumatic stress, if you lost income as a result of an arrest, and it gets even bigger when you talk about malicious prosecution or even other civil rights violations like due process, where someone's been incarcerated for a long period of time. Certainly those damages get quite big because not only are you entitled to damages for the incarceration and the inhumanity of being incarcerated, you're also entitled to damages for the money you lost from not working.
Right.
And any cost of defense. And, we've had cases where people were charged with murder, for example, and they spent over $100,000 defending themselves. We were able to get that back.
Oh, for sure. Right. Okay. What about this? I think you kind of just touched on this, but I'm falsely arrested, but it happens in front of people, happens in front of my boss, let's say.
Well, certainly, yeah, if you're falsely arrested, you can certainly sue for loss of income. And we've certainly had we have cases now where people, because of the arrest, didn't show up to work and they're fired. So certainly, if any consequence really of the false arrest itself or the prosecution are recoverable. We had one very large case, with an individual who was himself a police officer falsely charged with murder, and his license to be a police officer was suspended. So we were able to actually recover all the money he would have made throughout the course of his career.
Yeah, that makes sense. In my mind, I was thinking more. And that was perfectly clear and good to hear. I was thinking reputational almost, like it's the damage to my reputation because people thought I was arrested for some crime that I never did,
Well, certainly nowadays, especially, you see a lot more of that because with people's names are ending up in the newspapers, social media. There's a lot. when someone is arrested, there's a lot of times just cameras around. Now all of a sudden it's on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and so it's widely broadcast. Whereas before it may have been containable. Now the fact that someone's arrested gets broadcast almost instantaneously in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Once it's on the internet, baby, that's hard to pull back.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, listen, Michael, great to talk to you. We're pretty much up against time here for this conversation, but thanks for sharing your expertise and point of view.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Trial Talk, insights from experienced New York trial attorney Michael Joseph. If you or someone you know believes their rights were violated through a false arrest, visit the website newyorktriallawyers.org to learn more about your legal options and connect with Michael. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, maybe leave a review or share a link to the episode with someone who you think might benefit from it. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.